Thank you, Ovid, and we are so excited actually to be welcoming Ovid to Washington, D.C. from New Hampshire, and so I hope you all will take a minute to get to know him as well, because he will be spending a lot of time on Capitol Hill and helping us to work with you all as we are wanting to be of service to you in helping to craft legislation. So I really want to recognize Senator Mike Lee, who has helped us put this briefing together and who has co-sponsored the event. And when they arrive, I'm also going to want to welcome Congressman Fleming and Congresswoman Blackburn, who have been so gracious in agreeing to speak. And then Dr. Calhoun will be speaking a little bit later, who is a professor and vice chair at the University of West Virginia at Charleston. And I'd also like to recognize Angela Lanfranchi. Thank you so much for coming. She's also an expert in this field. So we might put you on the spot a little bit later. So the question that I'd like to begin with this morning, or this afternoon, is should abortion come with a warning label? Should abortion come with a warning label? We put a warning label on a lot of products, and we mandate that because of the health risks associated with them. And we are going to argue to you today that there are such significant health risks to abortion that women are unaware of, and they need to be they deserve to have informed consent in knowing about that. Particularly, we stand here today in the wake of the conviction of Kermit Gosnell for several counts of infanticide, and also I would remind us all today that he also was instrumental in the death of a woman, Karnamaya Mongar, who came to his clinic after having survived 20 years in a refugee camp, and coming to America, met such horrific conditions in his condition that in his clinic that she lost her life. So today we are launching here with you all Americans United for Life's Women's Protection Project, because women deserve protection from the harms of abortion. And my purpose in setting out a framework for the briefing is to help you focus on the fact that there are two prongs to this project. One that we are going to heavily emphasize today is abortion's harm to women, and this is why we're so glad to have Dr. Calhoun here. He's going to walk you through the well-documented, very well-documented harms that abortion poses to women's health. But as I'm setting this out, because you all work here on the Hill and your job is to be involved in drafting legislation, I want you to be able to understand how the Women's Protection Project fits into a legal strategy that targets Roe. Americans United for Life is the legal architect of the pro-life movement, and so our expertise is in looking at the constitutional strategy of how we defend life and law. And part of that defense involves knowing how we can best target the legal underpinnings of Roe. And so the Women's Protection Project does two things. While it is protecting women's health, it is also actually has a legal structure to it, and I'm going to walk you through that in a minute. Now, let's put a personal and a human face on this question of whether abortion deserves a warning label. Earlier this week, I ran across an article online by a young woman named Alexis Singer. I don't know if any of you all saw this, but it was I tweeted it out. If you'd like to see the link, I hope you'll come follow me on Twitter, and you can find it there. But it was entitled, "What It's Really Like to Have an Abortion." And so she talked about the process that she went through of discovering that she was pregnant and then making the abortion decision and how that affected her. And she said, no amount of sex education prepares you for that trapped feeling, Taking the test is like preparing for a funeral. And that she walks you very vividly what that felt like to her as she saw two lines on the test and not one. And I have to tell you, even though I've had 5 children myself, I never really quite thought until I heard her describe that the really ironic symbolism of the pregnancy test having 2 lines instead of one. And then she says, very poignantly, no one tells you how it will feel, and she means the abortion. No one tells you how it will feel, how the waiting feels, the endless time. No one tells you that you will lie there totally open, totally lost, and that it will hurt. She goes on to describe that in a very moving way. And then she concludes at the end of it by saying, nothing goes back to normal. Nothing goes back to normal afterward. And what I really want us to focus on as a context for this briefing is this poignant statement by her that really speaks to me, because my professional job is to get up every morning and find the motivation to work on the abortion issue. And she says, no one tells you how it feels. Not only do they not tell you how it feels, though, they don't tell you what the effects are going to be on each woman. There isn't truth in advertising as it relates to abortion today. Today we're in the immediate aftermath of convicting Kermit Gosnell for the death of Karnamaya Mongar, but there are other women. Just in the last 6 months we've seen the death of Tanya Reeves in a Planned Parenthood, in Chicago this past August. And Jennifer Morbelli died just a couple months ago right down the road in Maryland in Carhart's clinic. And as you all know, Dr. Carhart is one of the celebrated doctors of the abortion movement. So the truth of the matter is, Kermit Gosnell is not an aberration. He's not an aberration. These effects on women are coming all across the abortion industry, and not just in Kermit Gosnell's House of Horrors. So abortion advocates frequently like to posit us in the pro-life movement as waging a war on women, and that we're just about being pro-baby. But this is really a false framework. The truth is, we want to be advancing legislation that pays attention to both the baby and the mother, because this is where the American people need to be educated. So how does this affect you? Let's bring this down to asking the so what question. Why should you care, and what should you do about it? In your role of being involved in legislation, what we want to help you and enable you through today is to see that in your legislative findings, as you advance the life issue on Capitol Hill, we need to be educating the public and educating the legislature and educating the courts, specifically the courts, on how abortion harms women. So let's look a little bit at the legal landscape. Starting with Planned Parenthood v. Casey in 1992. That case was a real touchstone for where we stand today in terms of the legal landscape. In that case, Justice Kennedy, and you all know how significant his vote is on the court in terms of this issue, Justice Kennedy sketched out something that has come to be known in the legal arena as the reliance interest. He was answering the question of why do we need to maintain the right to abortion, and the answer that he gave is that American women have come to rely on abortion for their status in society. He wrote, "The ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by abortion." So boiling that all down, basically what Justice Kennedy is expressing is the sense of the court that women really need abortion and that it empowers them in a certain way, that women are not able to compete equally with men in our culture unless they have abortion. I want you, within this framework, to start listening to the abortion debate with different ears, because you will hear the other side consistently using this messaging of empowerment every single time they talk about abortion. I don't have to remind you that they don't talk about abortion. We're going to talk about abortion a whole lot more here today than they ever. If we had a similar briefing from allies of big abortion, the word that you would hear from them is empowerment. That's the word that you would hear from them. And that is not just a slogan. It's actually rooted in our constitutional law today. So fast forward from 1992 to Gonzales v. Carhart in 2007, which was the partial birth abortion case. And what most people focus on with Gonzales v. Carhart was the specific outcome of that case, which was an upholding of the ban on partial birth abortion. So that was the specific legislative outcome of that case. But in terms of legal strategy, it's really important to underscore that Justice Kennedy, again, please note that it's Justice Kennedy again, because what he wrote in this case represents kind of an evolution of his thinking, and it highlights and gives us a lot of information about what he was thinking. What he wrote was that a state has a legitimate interest in protecting maternal health. The state has a legitimate interest in protecting maternal health. So what we need to understand very fully as we are looking at crafting legislative findings is that the court has not left us in the dark about what the path forward is in terms of making an argument in front of them that they are receptive to. They are receptive to the argument that the state can regulate abortion as it relates to women's health and to maternal health specifically. So under the Gonzales ruling, technically, it's the legislature's role to evaluate the medical evidence and determine the best way to protect women in light of that evidence. So I hope that helps you to see the context of why Dr. Calhoun's role today is so essential. He's here to help us in working with the legislature because the court has told us that that's the path forward in terms of addressing the abortion issue. So very importantly, there's two key points that you want to address as you're looking at a particular piece of pro-life legislation. It needs to have two prongs to it. It needs to address the unborn, obviously. Please don't ever misunderstand, because sometimes some people do. But I think as a pro-life movement, we've done a good job of addressing the unborn in different pieces of model legislation, and there's an excellent piece of model legislation, the unborn, the pain-capable bill that's going forward in the House that we are very supportive of. But this other pillar that Americans United for Life has been working on, in particular I'd like to recognize Clark Forsyth, our senior counsel, who is here today, who's been very instrumental in crafting this legislative language. There's another pillar that needs to be involved in abortion bans, and this is this question of maternal health. So Americans United for Life has a model specifically called the Women's Health Protection Act, and we're very proud that this particular legislation passed in Arizona last year. And as an illustration for you of how significant that legislation is, the Center for Reproductive Rights filed to enjoin the legislation immediately after its passage. And it has worked its way through the courts until just this last month, the Ninth Circuit came back and ruled against the law. And we are fully expecting it, however, to be appealed to the Supreme Court, which is precisely what you want to see happen. So what is it that's particularly significant about that particular piece of legislation? Because it has a particular pillar of legislative findings that detail the fact that after 20 weeks, the harm to women, particularly as it relates to maternal mortality, escalates like a hockey stick on a chart. The risk to women's mortality with abortion, in late-term abortion in particular, and we define late-term abortion as after 20 weeks. See, people like to think of late-term abortion as being, that partial birth abortion right before birth, but in actual fact, the risks to women really dramatically increase at and after 20 weeks. And so the Women's Health Protection Act, which we have with us here today, specifically details the after 20-week threats to women's health. And so in just a minute, Dr. Calhoun is going to join us, and he's going to go very carefully over those findings. I do want to set up Dr. Calhoun's findings because he's going to go over the fact that abortion's harm to women includes low birth weight of children born subsequent to a woman's initial abortion, maternal mortality, which I've already referenced, and can I just say, in terms of my heart on this issue, it is really, really tragic to me that women continue to die in this country from abortion and that no one pays attention. That the media just completely acts as if those deaths are to be expected as a normal part of business with the abortion right. And I believe we have to push back against that with every fiber of our being. There's also a very, very significant risk of depression, and this is not just being sad. This is actual clinical depression, and with an increase of suicidal ideation related to it. And with deference to Angela and her expertise on this issue, there's also an association between abortion and a risk of breast cancer. And as a breast cancer survivor, that's also very important to me. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude, because I do want to be sure and give Congressman Fleming lots of time, and we will have time for questions after Dr. Calhoun's presentation. But let me just go ahead and introduce Congressman Fleming. We're so grateful for your willingness to be a hero on this issue. This is not a politically correct issue, as we all well know. You take a lot of flames and arrows for taking a stand, particularly up on Capitol Hill on this issue. And so Congressman Fleming is a real hero of mine, and he's here today particularly because he is a family medicine doctor. So he has a dual expertise, not just as a legislator, but someone who has an expertise in the medical arena. He was first elected to Congress in 2008, and he represents Louisiana's 4th Congressional District. He is a member of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus, and I'm very proud to say that he has a 100% pro-life rating from Americans United for Life Action. So if you would please come join us, we are very, very pleased.
God bless you all, and thanks for the opportunity. I am from Louisiana, and not only am I a family physician, but I'm also a father of 4, and a grandfather of 2.5. That is to say, I'm expecting my first granddaughter in August, so we're very delighted about that. You know, as a family physician, I delivered back in the day hundreds of babies. And, you know, every time I delivered a baby, it was like the whole experience, the whole wonderment of it, the mystery that went along with it, I relived it again and again. I never got used to it. In fact, it's similar to the experience that I have, you know, when I fly back to Washington. I'm coming back from being home in my district, driving up the street and seeing the Capitol at night, you know, with the lights, and you get that kind of giddy feeling, kind of tingly sensation. Well, that's the way it was each and every time that I had the opportunity to deliver a baby. So I felt that that is Carl Sandburg's, I think his famous quote is, "It's God's opinion that the world goes on every time we have a baby born." A lot's going on in this movement, and I'll just touch some high points and certainly give way to Ms. Blackburn here. We're working hard, but I think there's some things that we're learning about the whole movement, the pro-life movement. One is that, you know, we keep trying to fix Roe v. Wade, and after all these decades, we're just simply not able to do it. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying. We should. We're gaining ground. For the first time since Roe v. Wade, we have more Americans who are pro-life than ever before. In fact, a majority for the first time. But, you know, we need to learn the power of incremental movement and a forward motion. And we are doing that. And it's really happening on the states. As many of you know, Louisiana, it ranks usually number 1 or number 2 in the nation on reforms that are ongoing. Things like a cooling off period before a young lady makes that final decision. The requirement that she's offered an ultrasound before making that final decision. Powerful, powerful tools for life. Arkansas recently passed a law, it's held up in court now, that says that abortions can't be done after 12 weeks. We're gaining ground on this. As a physician, I understand, and many of you need to learn about this, is that there's a lot of things we can do in requiring doctors to be accountable for their practices. For instance, it used to really send me up the wall when a young lady would come in after an abortion with a complication. To me of all people. Why? Because the doctor did the abortion and left town, of all things. Well, there are laws being passed through many states now that say, no, you have to be there for post-op care, for complications. You have to be there when it comes to the need to be on hospital staff so you can perform surgery, and you don't just dump that problem to somebody else. So we need to continue that incremental movement. We need to reduce the number of abortions while we're trying to stop abortions to begin with. And here's the other thing. We're all aware of the recent Gosnell situation. Now, wasn't it really the argument in the first place that if we made abortions legal and transparent, that we would not have Gosnells of the world, right? The backroom abortions. But what did we find with Gosnell? Government totally ignored the oversight role that it had for care in that building. We know that the only reason as I understand the story, that he was even discovered was they had figured out that he had a pill mill, that it was really giving out OxyContin or selling it. I mean, this man was in this business for money. Make no mistake about it. It was not about high principles. He was there to make money, and he was making it hand over fist. And they got suspicious not because there was blood on the wall or because women were getting venereal disease from the instruments that weren't being cleaned. It was because of the pill mill that was going on there. And then they got suspicious when they saw some pretty disturbing things like little babies' feet in jars and, of course, blood on the walls. And so that brings up the other important topic, and that is Trent Frank's bill, which is a pain-capable bill that we, of course, tried to pass into law here in D.C. As you know, a woman can actually have an abortion even up to and during labor in D.C. and other places. Yeah, that's right. A woman can be termed, in theory, I'm not saying that it happens, but in theory, it's not against the law to perform an abortion in some venues, even up to the point of actual delivery. Going back to Gosnell, why did he actually do these clippings, killing babies after they were born? Well, it turns out that he would do abortions so late in the pregnancy that he was having terrible complications and getting sued. So he figured out it was safer to just go ahead and force a delivery of a premature baby. And then if it came out alive, then he would kill it then. You see, he was reducing his risk while he was killing the baby. But let me just end by saying this. When it comes to abortion, there are two victims here. There's a victim, the obvious victim, the unborn. And in the case of those who are 20 weeks or more, and I suspect even less than that, they're feeling pain. They're feeling pain. We know that. How do we know that? Because we're in an era now where we actually do surgery on fetuses while they're still in the womb for defects that may give them greater survivability towards term. And what they did is, as they videoed these procedures, they see the baby moving away from pain, as you would. They obviously feel pain, and as a result of that, they anesthetize them. So when they're doing surgery on them to save their lives, they have to anesthetize them, not to cause pain and not to torture them. But Dr. Gosnell and others who do late-term and mid-term abortions, dismembering babies, that's got to be very painful and very torturous. So here we are, a society that believes that you can't waterboard humans even though they're terrorists, and a society that believes that we have a humane society for animals, and yet we ignore what's happening to young babies in the womb. So we have two victims. We have the baby and we have the mom. And I won't belabor that because we all already heard about that, but you know that the incidence of depression, of suicide, and many, many negative outcomes when it comes to later miscarriages and all the other things that can be problematic for life and outcome are higher when it comes to young ladies who have abortions. Anyway, thank you for your time. God bless you. Keep up the great work that you're doing today.
Thank you.
I didn't mention that Congressman Fleming has also introduced the Healthcare Conscience Rights Act, which is a whole nother topic that's very important to us right now, and I thank you for your leadership on that. It's now my great honor to introduce another pro-life hero, and just to illustrate how heroic Marsha Blackburn is, today is her birthday. So I appreciate you celebrating your birthday with us, and how appropriate as well. Congresswoman Blackburn was first elected to Congress in 2002, and she represents Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. She also is 100% pro-life with our voting scorecard, and she, I don't use the word hero lightly. Coming out of an election where the issue, if we heard it once, we heard it a million times, that Republicans were waging a war on women. And how did Congresswoman Blackburn respond? She introduced the very first pro-life bill as soon as the 113th Congress got started, H.R. 61, which would block Title X funding from going to facilities until they certify that they won't provide abortion. That is a really politically incorrect thing to do, and I'm honored to know you.
You know, it is one of those things people say, well, wasn't there a war on women? Well, The Democrats tried to make it that way, and we were fully aware of that. But what we need to be certain is that as we look at women's issues, life is a women's issue. It's a family issue. And what we want to make certain is that we are doing our part to defend it and to make certain that we improve the quality of life. And I always find it so very interesting in talking with women. When you talk about unborn children, science is on our side. And I would encourage you, as you talk to your friends, I know I use this when I talk to my friends. And so many now are having that first grandchild. And as soon as they get that sonogram and the ultrasound, and they hear the heartbeat, and they find out if it's a girl or boy, it's a baby, and baby has a name. And plans are being made. And the birth date is just anticipated, and everyone is excited. So talk about it in those terms. Talk about science and how we are able to, Dr. Fleming just spoke to this, how they're able to increase the outcomes in the term, carrying babies to term, by being able to do these surgeries that are very delicate and very intricate. So this is an area where science is on our side. Now, as you talk about that and talk about life, it's also a great opportunity to talk about what Planned Parenthood has done. You know, one of the things that gets people the most right now is cronyism and the federal government showing favoritism and making grants without accountability. And look, Planned Parenthood is a great example of that. $542 million last year. And we find out that they're big abortion business. They are in business to make a big profit, to the point that now they have a requirement that all of their affiliates perform abortions. That's big abortion business for you. Their assets of $1.2 billion. That is why we do have H.R. 61. It was the first pro-life bill of this Congress. But it came about because in Energy and Commerce 2 years ago, I started an investigation of Planned Parenthood through our Oversight and Investigations Committee. As we started hearing about what was happening in some of these clinics and the misuse of federal funds. So this is where good government is on our side. So we've got science on our side, and we've got good government holding Planned Parenthood accountable for the money, the taxpayer money, that they are taking to carry out a mission that the majority of Americans do not agree with. We can use that to help people to understand why we oppose this. We're for good government, and we have science on our side. Now, I want to say a couple of things about the Gosnell trial. And as Dr. Fleming mentioned, the awareness that came about through that. One of the most egregious steps and components of and there are so many, 250 different counts on which he was convicted, and the fact that he would do everything to avoid the death penalty after he had sentenced these babies to death. I just thought that was horrific. But through the process, of course, the media would not cover it, and they also would not cover the fact that Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania knew about this, but Planned Parenthood did not report this. They told the victims to go report this. There again, for people who are looking for accountability, they are wondering why. Why did they not do that? If they're getting federal funds, if abortion is to be safe, legal, and rare, why did they choose not to report that? We're also looking at what is coming from the states, and I encourage you to follow along with us at Energy and Commerce Committee. We have sent a letter that is going to the states, has already gone, asking every Department of Health in this country what they are doing to oversee these abortion clinics. We're doing it because over the past 3 years, 15 states have reported that there are severe violations. We are now hearing of individuals who have left these clinics. They are coming in, they are reporting. There is a lot of information out there. It is the type of information that will help us pass H.R. 61 and end the federal funding of abortion and abortion services. The other component that we will have, Senator Lee has a resolution in the Senate, and I've got it in the House, to examine the practices that have led to this multi-state breakdown of oversight. So as we continue at Energy and Commerce Committee to continue with our Planned Parenthood investigation, to do this oversight and investigation, then we will add to it what has happened through the states. Why would they have chosen to turn a blind eye and not regulate these clinics and go for years and not go into these clinics? Years. So that will be on our plate as we begin to move forward. And we think that it is an important issue to bring forward to our committee, to continue with our oversight, to use it as a component of increasing the support for the community of life and for the preservation of the right to life in our country. So we thank you for the good work you always do, and I thank you for letting me stop in, and I'm going to pop over to Reagan and get on a plane and head home. Thank you.
This is a wonderful opportunity that we have today to hear from these people who are going against what has become the received wisdom in their particular field. So Margaret Sanger went after the legislators, and she went after the taxpayer dollars. But there is another element that she used in order to construct this coalition that has managed to entrench abortion in our country, and it's the medical establishment. She specifically and deliberately made a strategy of going after and co-opting the medical establishment. Why is it that abortion needs a warning label but it does not have one? Why is it that the American women do not understand the health risks of abortion? It's because Margaret Sanger went after and co-opted the medical establishment. But today Byron Calhoun is at the forefront of breaking that silence in the medical arena. He is a professor and vice chair in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at West Virginia University. He has been published very extensively. He's authored over 70 peer-reviewed articles. He's presented over 100 scientific papers and participated in over 40 research projects. Very noticeably, he was invited to testify before the Congressional Subcommittee on the Constitution just this past year in May 2012 on the Pain Capable Unborn Child Act. And so I'm very glad to have him here today, and he's going to talk about the health risks of abortion to women.
And I also like to tell you, I'm not representing West Virginia University. I want to be very clear on that. This is representing the science. I'm representing myself professionally. So you understand that this is coming from where the science is to this day. And what I want to do is talk about three things, all right? And I want to set it out so we know where we're going, because those of you who are very German, like my wife, want to know where we're going, right? They want to know the roadmap. And for those of you like Irish, like me, it's just the story. So there's three things we're going to talk about today. One is increased risk of death by abortion. We're going to talk about increased risk of mental health problems. We're going to talk about increased risk of preterm or very preterm births. And I really like this statement because an Irishman made it. But Edmund Burke said, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing." The time has come now to join Burke by addressing this evil perpetuated against women by elective abortion. Elective abortion advocates would have the world and women believe that there are no harms in abortion. They would have the world and women believe that they could take the life of a human being, of the member of the Homo sapiens, and they would suffer no ill effects. We knew this was not true in 1973, but the lack of scientific evidence to support that assertion did not exist. Now, however, this data does exist. Even so, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Psychological Society, Planned Parenthood, and NARAL still refuse to acknowledge any risks with elective abortion. But the risks are real, and they include the risk of death, increased risk of mental health problems, increase of risk or very preterm babies and delivery. It was recently quoted in 2012 as a myth of the mythology of the American College that in 2012 they published an article in Obstetrics and Gynecology that always says the same thing, which just makes my blood boil, actually. The risk of death associated with childbirth is approximately 14 times higher than abortion. The statement is unsupported by the literature, and there is no credible basic scientific evidence to support it. It is simply false. It's simply false. A reasonable woman and a man would want to find any discussion about the risk of dying from a procedure that would be material. That would be important and significant, would it not? Informed consent would say you should know what you're getting into before you do it for a surgical procedure. In order for us to be able to address this, we must have objective and reliable information concerning this particular abortion or particular procedure. Now, unfortunately, methodologically, this is complicated, and there's lots of factors that talk about making valid assessments quite difficult at times. Among them are incomplete reporting, definitions that are actually incompatible. What does this mean and what does that mean? Political correctness, which is probably the major issue, I would say. Inaccurate, incomplete death certificates, the incompatibility of various maternal mortality statistics, and the failure to include any sort of death certificates that include homicides or suicides as a result of abortion within the mortality statistics. Given the importance of the disclosure, the lack of this credible and scientific evidence requires substantial discussion. And this is where it's going to get a little more complicated. Bear with me, we will get there. First, abortion statistics are totally unreliable in the United States. The only people that report is the CDC. It is voluntary. Only 26 states report. California does not report. The largest abortion provider outside of New York does not report to the CDC. It is purely voluntary. So, there is no data. The CDC data are unreliable because they're based on estimates with voluntary submission by state departments of health, including West Virginia. It's voluntary to report your complications and your abortions in the state of West Virginia, whose accuracy is widely known to be inconsistent and unreliable. The only other institution, which is Planned Parenthood's arm, the Guttmacher Institute, has voluntary reporting also. Well, that sounds a little bizarre. Since when does voluntary really ever work? Not very often, right? Especially when you're talking statistics. I like this. Disraeli said, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics, right? Right? So, garbage in, garbage out. There's three other things I'd like to talk about based on this. One, there's no reporting. So we underreport U.S. abortions because people don't even reveal it. And that happens in my practice all the time, unless I carefully question and make people understand why I need to know. There are no fetal death certificates when abortion occurs, so therefore they're not recorded, and no one knows that they even had an abortion when they have a maternal death. And the third thing is, as we've heard previously, most women do not come back to the abortion clinic when they have a complication. They come to me, and they come to my emergency room. They don't go to the abortion clinic. So they don't even know they had a complication because there's no record of the procedure and there's no linking of the complication. Second thing, definitional issues regarding maternal mortality are problematic and not comparable. What that really means is there's very little data, except in certain databases, which I'll talk about later, that talk about this. In fact, the World Health Organization says all existing estimates, now remember that means we just make it up. That's really what it means. When you hear estimate, think made up, of maternal mortality are subject to greater or lesser degrees of uncertainty. In fact, they adjust by over 50%, most of these statistics, 50%. Now, after a while, 50% and 50% and 50% added up logarithmically makes it ridiculous is what it makes it, correct? Also, WHO, World Health Organization, has 7 different methods to talk about maternal death. 7 different methods. Which one do you want? Whichever one you like. You mean, you like this death or you like that death? It's not that way. Death is death. It's right. It's the final arbiter. Drives me nuts. Abortion-related deaths are not easily or accurately verified or identified. In fact, now let's talk about what people when they talk about maternal death. Okay? So maternal death, according to the World Health Organization, is a death of a woman while pregnant or within 42 days of the ending of the pregnancy, regardless of the site or the pregnancy, right? That's not caused or related by the pregnancy or management, but not from accidental or incidental cause. In other words, the pregnancy caused the death. That's maternal death. Late maternal death, now we're getting more fun, aren't we? Late maternal death now, not just death, late maternal death, are from more than 40 days, but less than 1 year after termination of pregnancy. Now, maternal death, up to 42 days. Who decided 42 days? They did. More than 42 days is a late maternal death. Pregnancy-related death. Now, see how this goes? Isn't this fun? Isn't this statistic? This is great, isn't it? Pregnancy-related deaths are either direct, meaning it was a direct result of your pregnancy, you died of a bleeding or maternal complication, or indirect, it aggravated your hypertension or your diabetes. And those are the things they used to talk about. In fact, a 2003 publication by Elam Evans said that the estimating methods for related deaths are inadequate and underreported. In other words, there is no system in this country. So if you get anything today, there needs to be legislation that every abortion needs to be accounted for, and all maternal mortality needs to be dealt with, including those of abortion. If they take nothing else away, that needs to happen. Pregnancy-associated deaths. Now, this is the one that the American College and the special group said we should do now is up to death up to 1 year after delivery or pregnancy termination, regardless of any way or where it happened, whether it's an ectopic pregnancy or abortion or a miscarriage even. Third, measurements are very problematic. Generally, when you measure deaths, you say, how would you measure it? Usually it's per 100,000. It's just the way we do it, statistically and empirically. Now, the problem with it is that no one will tell you which 100,000 they're going to do, and they will actually adjust it. So there are difficulties in measuring mortality because no one will tell you what exactly the mortality is. Is it 1 year? Is it 42 days? There's a lack of consensus how to link pregnancies with maternal mortality. We know that there's at least 12 to 50% discrepancy in reporting. We know that there's incomplete records because people do not report abortions and they don't go back to their abortion providers, so they're not recorded as abortion deaths. Also, people who get these serious life-threatening problems come to me. They don't go back to the abortionist. Abortion-related deaths are not reported as maternal deaths because the abortion was never known. And in fact, if you look at, nail this in your head. Nail this in your head. This is an important point for you to take home today. If you don't think of anything else, this is one of those things to say. The risk of dying from abortion is twice as high as it is from a term pregnancy. Okay? If an uncomplicated delivery is compared to an uncomplicated abortion, the risk of dying is twice as high with the abortion. You cannot compare all abortions, first trimester abortions with all pregnancy and delivery. That's not a fair comparison. It's apples to oranges. You should compare week by week. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Available statistics also do not talk about in this country looking at long-term effects, which I'm going to talk about also, after completion of a term pregnancy. In other words, are you at risk for suicide? Are you at risk for homicide? Are you at risk for all terms death in 1 year? Do you get increased risk for breast cancer? National databases use term pregnancies associated with abortion at any point in pregnancy. Basically, what that means is this. If you do it with term deliveries or delivery, those abortions never show up in the denominator because they don't go to term, do they? So 40% of the time, the numbers in the numerators don't show up in the denominators. That's called cheating, actually, is what that's called, right? Yeah, it's called cheating. Yeah, because you're never going to have a term pregnancy with an ectopic or a miscarriage or an abortion, now are you? No. So you can't have it comparing to a term pregnancy or a delivery, can you? So that's invalid. So every time they say this, they always want to talk about comparing to a delivery or a pregnancy that is a term and delivery. That is a lie, and it's a misuse of the statistics, and it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. Don't believe it. They're not analogous because basically you have no stage of gestation. Let me share with you the data that's out there. This was published in 2004, and this is going to be very interesting too. Think this through. And this is actually on page 7 if you're following through like my wife does, right? At the top, mortality rates increase dramatically. It's almost a logarithmic function. Remember those logarithmic stuff? Remember the stuff you hated, like, oh my God, not logs? Yeah. Seriously, yeah. Those of us are, medicine, math. So per 100,000 procedures, it goes from, at 13 to 15 weeks, it's 14.7 per 100,000 procedures, not 0.4, 0.3, or 0.2, or 0.1, is it? Okay, at 16 to 20 weeks, it's 29.5 per 100,000 procedures, and at greater than 20 weeks, it's 76 or 77 per 100,000 procedures. Maternal death rate here in this country is between 9 and 10 per 100,000 procedures, or 100,000 deliveries at term. So, it's not safer. It's not safer because you can't compare apples to oranges and not have all this in there and go by gestational age. Well, also, what about the research we talked about compared to childbirth? And we looked at in part B here, it says, what about those who were pregnant? And we did a study actually in 2008 in this country and said those who had an abortion were 62% more likely to die from any cause within a year after their abortion compared to those who did not have. They were 154% more likely to commit suicide within a year after the abortion than those who did not have an abortion, or who delivered deliveries. And this is record linked from California, and this is Medicaid data, so they actually had the data pretty well linked. In Finland, where they collect everything, the Finns are phenomenally good. They've had a healthcare system since about 74 or 5. Everything's in there, all the healthcare encounters. What they found is that there was a 3 times higher mortality rate in abortion compared to childbirth. 3 times. 3 times higher. They also found that was a 6 times higher risk for suicide meaning you completed the suicide, not just you attempted, but you actually completed the suicide and you killed yourself. Record linkage would have found less than 30% of those. 73% of these patients would not have been found unless they linked records. 73%. So, without statistics, you cannot make the claims that are made by the people who would like you to believe that abortion causes no harm. If you look down further, hemorrhage and infection deaths are 8 to 9 times greater in abortions compared to term deliveries. The number of abortion complications and mortality might increase 30 to 150% if we just actually collected some data for a change instead of just said, oh, give us what you feel like, right? Whatever you feel like giving to us, right? But I think, at least my patients, when I have a reasonable woman, I consider most of my patients to be fairly reasonable women. Well, maybe not all. And I'm not very reasonable either sometimes, yeah. A reasonable patient would like to include all causes of abortion and death, right? So they would include suicide, perhaps breast cancer risks, death from hemorrhage, suicide, and or all causes, and homicides. Your death rate's 3 to 4 times higher if you have this abortion. Ma'am, I just want you to know that. Your risk for suicide is 6 times higher. I want you to know that before I do this. Just like if I do your cesarean section, you can bleed to death, or you can become infected, you can die from this. If you have a pulmonary embolism, you can die from this. We'll try to save your baby, but you can still die from this. That's what you have to tell people. But they don't tell people that. Well, what's the most recent stuff, which is fascinating? I love this last stuff because Dr. Koch and Dr. Carroll did some very interesting things. Patrick Carroll's actually an actuarial. And he looked at all the data in 42 years in the United Kingdom and found out that basically the death rate in England and Scotland and Wales was about 2 to 3 times higher with legal abortion than in the Republic of Ireland with no abortion. The death rate was like 1 or 2 per 100,000. It's 8 to 9 or 10 per 100,000. So again, and Koch actually looked at Mexico. The estimates were over a 10-fold overestimation of mortality. In fact, they found mortality dropped when they made abortion illegal. Dropped by 30%. That doesn't fit the facts, does it? Abortions actually made mortality less. Imagine that. Mental health. Basically, I'm going to talk about Coleman's data mostly. There was a meta-analysis done in 2011 and 10. There were 100 studies she looked at. And what she basically found was that if you categorized women and you looked at coercion, you looked at ambivalence, you looked at committed to the pregnancy, you looked at adolescent mental health problems, conflicted relationship, negative relationships, poor quality abortion care, that is no counseling, these are all related to bad outcomes. And what she actually found, which is actually going back to page 11, is that she found increased risk for suicide, alcohol abuse, depression, anxiety, and also use of marijuana. And in fact, what she was able to calculate, which is very interesting for terms of mental health, is that 20% of women who abort suffered serious psychological problems. 20%. And what she also did was say that from basically, there was a 34 to 230% risk of an adverse outcome in terms of your psychological well-being. And she said there's actually a 10% incident of mental health problems directly attributable to abortion. So what I did is I did my usual simple math. I'm a simple guy. I'm an obstetrician. You're either pregnant, you're not. It's either in the uterus, it's not, right? It's either term or it's not. I mean, seriously, right? It's pretty binomial for me. And I said, well, what about if we have 1.2 million abortions a year? That's 120,000 women affected every year by mental health issues, by abortion. That's enough to fill your DC stadium twice every year. It's about 55,000, 60,000 people, right? Twice a year. Well, I said, well, wait a minute. What if there's 50 million abortions been done over the last 40 years? That's enough. That's 5 million women affected. That's enough to fill a city of Chicago times 2 over. That's 5 million people. Well, wait a minute. That can't be true. Well, it is true. The data says it's true. So to say there's no effects, I'll bet you if I talk to somebody in this room, you don't have to raise your hand. You know somebody, or somebody you have, or you yourself have been affected by abortion, and someone you know has had a horrific psychological or mental health problems from abortion. I know it's true. I know it's true, because I see it every day in my clinic. And it's higher than 10%, believe me, you. And I'm going to save my best for last. I've only got 2 or 3 minutes here. This is my heart. This is my heart. Preterm birth, okay? I'm a maternal fetal medicine. I do high-risk obstetrics every day, and it breaks my heart when people deliver their babies at 24, 25, 26 weeks, and their babies are just either don't survive or they suffer terribly. Well, I know you find it hard to believe, but there are 138 studies now. Oh, but they don't really mean, that's just junk science. You're going to hear that term, junk science? You heard that term, junk science? That's what we're going to talk about me. I'm junk science. Well, there's 138 peer-reviewed, published studies now in the literature since 1973. Oh, what an interesting year that would be, 73, 74. That's familiar, isn't it? That show an increased risk for preterm delivery with abortion, with elective abortion. There's been several meta-analyses that increases your rate between 37 and 93%. The risk goes up if you have more abortions. In other words, there's a dose effect. The least you would see is 30 to 40%. I've seen as high as 200 or 300% increased risk quoted. In fact, there was a great study done in 2012 that looked at the 2 or more abortions, the risk for delivery before 28 weeks was increased by 70%. 3 or more abortions increase your risk by 178%. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but a baby below 28 weeks is a disaster. A disaster. Furthermore, they found that 3 or more abortions increase your risk by 35% below 37 weeks, and it increased your risk for a very premature birth by over 125% below 28 weeks with abortions and multiple abortions. And it's basically, we see this over and over and over again. 2005 study, the same study, 70% likely to deliver before 28 weeks. 800% increased risk by preterm birth by women who's had 2 or more abortions. The Institute of Medicine actually says that first trimester abortion is a risk factor for subsequent preterm birth. The National Academy of Science says that. Institute of Medicine. It's 30 to 40% with just 1 abortion. Also, there may be as high as an 8 or 10 times increased risk with multiple abortions delivering before 28 weeks. I'll close again with reminding you what I came to tell you. Based on the overwhelming scientific evidence presented by myself today and in my handout, and you can get it whatever you want. I've got all the references if you want them, including the 138 studies, should you be sleepy at night and want to go get a little nighttime reading. There exists the following effects on women's health by elective abortion. They're indisputable, they're scientific. People need to stop denying it. They need to step up to the plate and admit it. Increased risk of death. Increased risk of mental health problems, including suicide, homicides, sleep deprivation, anxiety, and depression. And 3, an increased risk of a preterm or a very preterm 28-week baby. So everyone needs to be aware of this. All women need to have this given, and it should be in the informed consent, because if it's not, they're not giving women truth, and they're not treating women with the respect that they deserve. Thank you.
So the answer to the question I began with, does abortion deserve a warning label, is yes. Yes. Please help us get this information out to the general public. Please help us break the stranglehold that the medical establishment has on this information that Dr. Calhoun has just so succinctly put in front of you. We do have the handout. We do have a booklet on health risks to women for you to take back with you. We are so willing and anxious to do any kind of briefing with any legislator that you would like to have more detail on any of these issues. It's important to put a fine point on one of the points that Byron has brought out. Please, in your mind, remember the connection between this social science data and the legal strategy that targets Roe. This really, really compelling information that Byron has walked us through about how much more dangerous abortion is than pregnancy to women is actually enshrined in Roe v. Wade, this lie that he referred to, that somehow abortion is safer for women than pregnancy. It is actually in Roe v. Wade. It is actually there in the legal record. What is one of the best ways for us to get this information out to the American public? It is through legislative findings. Congress has one of the biggest microphones out there, and so we need to be actively working to get these findings into the legislative record. That's the whole purpose of our mission here today, is to help you catch that vision and to beg for your help in getting this information out to the American public. Now we are out of time, and I hope you sense our passion on this and how anxious we are to keep talking about this issue, but we will conclude because we told you we would only keep you till 1 o'clock. We do have the room till 1:30, and I know Byron is more than willing to take your questions. So those of you who need to go, please feel free to do so, but if you would like to have more of a conversation and some questions for Byron, please just come forward to the front of the room. Thank you very much for being here.